This year, Bournemouth, England had its very first writing festival. Before that, anyone in the area would have had to go to Bath or to London or further to go to a writing festival. And so this year, a few people decided to put one together that I believe they hope to be an annual occurrence. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Sam. I'm a romance author based in the UK and specifically kind of near Bournemouth. So when I saw that there was a writing festival on, I got really excited, and while I found out about it too late to apply to be a speaker, I decided to attend because there looked to be some really great talks on. So I went this past weekend, and I'd love to take you with me and tell you a little bit about the talks that I went to and what I learned. First, I've got just less than a minute of footage just from while I was there, just to set the tone, and then we'll come back and I'll tell you about the sessions that I went to and some of the key takeaways. So roll the tape. It was such a lovely weekend. I hope that you could tell from the video. It was just really lovely. While I was there, I took my iPad with me and I'm using GoodNotes 5, and I took notes that way. So I'm going to be looking down a lot while I'm telling you about things, and that's gonna just have to be okay with you. So I went to 3 sessions on Saturday and 3 sessions on Sunday. As you can see, on Saturday, I started by having lunch with one of my friends. I don't get to go into town very often, so I thought that I would take advantage of being nearby to have lunch with a couple of friends that would be there. But the first session that I went to on Saturday after lunch was one about writing memoirs. Now, I am not a memoirist, I'm a romance author, and I have no imminent plans to write a memoir. However, I was meant to be going to a session about character creation, but unfortunately the speaker had an emergency, and so that session got canceled, so I got asked what I would like to book onto instead. So like I said, the session was on writing memoirs, and it was given by the author of the memoir Chinglish, which is a memoir written for a YA audience. Now, Sue, who wrote this book, was also a children's author before writing Chinglish, and the way she tells the story, her agent basically begged her to write a memoir, like literally said, just literally give me a paragraph and we'll take it from there. In my experience and knowledge, unless you are like a celebrity or a household name, you do not get begged to write a memoir. So I don't know how much I believe that. And maybe that would have impacted the way that I viewed any advice that she gave, except for the fact that, to be honest, she didn't really give any advice in this session. It was meant to be about how to write a memoir, but it was not. The only actual piece of advice that she gave was to not be afraid to be honest and own your story regardless of what that means for the other people in your life that might be involved in that story, which I kind of agree with in principle, but also think that there's a lot more nuance to it than that. And given that she talked for 60 minutes, maybe she should have got into a bit more of the nuance behind that. I did try to ask in a question during the Q&A portion, like how she approached conversations with her parents and her siblings, because hers is a story of abuse, and she was basically like, oh, I just didn't. They knew the book was coming out, but we didn't really talk about it. So I didn't get a ton of insight there. The second session that I went to was about building your author brand story, and that was with Isabel Knight, who used to be a publicist. She didn't really name drop anyone except for She Who Must Not Be Named, which, like, I would say read the room, but actually I think the room was quite conservative, so maybe they would have been fine with that. I wasn't necessarily happy with how much she kept name dropping JKR, but she was a publicist, I think, for her books that she wrote under the Robert Galbraith pen name. But anyway, that's beside the point. She was talking about creating your author brand story. And she did talk a little bit about sort of the importance of that and what that does for your ability to publicize and market your book widely. I will say that the whole talk did feel a little bit like a sales pitch for her services, which is helping authors craft their brand story. I do kind of feel like if you're gonna go do a talk somewhere like that, you have to give away a little bit of your advice. You can't just hold everything back for hoping that you'll get a couple customers out of it. And people are paying to be there, so it feels like you should give them a little something. There were a couple pieces of advice, which I will share with you. One of the things that she talked about, which I've seen quite a lot, is when authors have like different names for different genres, or even just writing in different genres, that your brand story is something that can help you connect those things. So for example, if my brand story were about overcoming adversity, like the woman who wrote the memoir, then maybe that comes out in the fantasy that I write, and it also comes out in the women's fiction that I write, and it also comes out in the YA that I write, in different ways based on the context, but still sort of coming from that same point of motivation. You do have to think a little bit about what is a brand story that is authentically connected to why I write and what it is that's made me as an author who I am, so that it will be something that comes out in every story that I write. Because that brand story is the thing that you're then marketing almost more so than your book, because it's how you're building your platform as an author. It did give me a lot to think about, and I did start jotting down some ideas. What I wish you would have done was be a little bit more practical about how to apply that author brand story to how you approach publications, how you approach media opportunities, how you approach marketing. Now, I appreciate that it sounds like these first couple of sessions were duds, but I promise you every other session that I went to was better than those two, so don't leave. The last session that I went to on Saturday was about going to press, and this was a talk given by a reporter for the Bournemouth Echo, which is like the local paper, and it was very practical about basically how to construct a press release and how to approach print publications. Print, we'll say, because it would include the online arms of those publications. So I'm gonna try to share some of those practical insights with you. First of all, he said, don't count out local publications and media outlets just because it might be small, because first of all, those people are going to be more likely to want to read your work or buy whatever it is that you're selling because you're local, but also because a lot of local stories get picked up for larger publications. And yes, you could approach those larger publications as well, but having you approach them and then also seeing that a local one has picked it up, that can help add like gravitas and urgency to your story. Not that it's going to give you the biggest reach, but just like don't count it out. He also said to make sure that you're being honest about what is the best angle for that publication and that journalist that you're approaching. Is it the book or is it you as an author? And that kind of ties back to that previous session on building your author brand story. Like sometimes you are the angle, which then brings us to the next point, which is always know exactly who you're submitting to. Don't submit to just general editorial inboxes. Choose a person, do your research on what they're interested in, what kinds of stories they write, their style, any other books that they've mentioned or anything else that's relevant to the angle that you're trying to pitch them, and reference those within your communications. That's also what's going to help you identify what is the right angle for this pitch, because you'll be more familiar with the person in the publication because you've done your research. He then gave a lot of really practical information about constructing a press release. So the elements of the press release are a headline, an intro, the 5 W's, quotes, social proof, contact details, and photos. So your headline should be very, very short, and it should be very descriptive. It should hit as many of those beats as possible. He said, don't try to write a headline the way the journalist would write a headline. Write a headline that's as informative as possible, because that headline is the first thing that they're using to decide if they're interested in continuing to read. Then your intro is still very short. He said 25-ish words, which is also got to have all of that important information. And he says it also needs to have what he calls the crikey factor. So something that someone reads and it makes them say crikey, like something that is your hook, is something really interesting. This is the angle that we're talking about. Why would the publication care about printing your story? Give them that factor. Then you've got your 5 W's, your who, what, when, where, why. So just your basic information about the release, but that why is really, really important because that ties back to your crikey factor. Quotes, so that is quotes from you as the author about the publication, about why you wrote it, whatever is appropriate for the angle that you're pitching. Social proof, this could be reviews of your book. It could be, like, for example, my first book has really good Amazon ratings. It's got like 7,700 reviews at the moment with like over 4-star rating. Like, that's good. I could put that in there. Also, social proof could be like other publications that it's run in, especially if those are really recent. That recency and wanting to jump on the news cycle of something is really important there if you're going to choose to include other snippets. Then your contact details, that's pretty obvious. And then photos, make them as relevant as possible to the angle that you're pitching and also to the place. So for example, my normal author photo is pretty generic, but I also have some photos the same photographer took of me in front of the beach huts in Bournemouth when I lived there, and those are quite iconic around here. So if I were pitching to the Bournemouth Echo, I might send them that author picture instead because it's like, oh, she really feels like a local author here. He said always write in third person, so as if it's someone else writing about you rather than you writing about yourself, and that your whole press release should be between 450 and 500 words. The bulk of that is going to come in your 5 W's and in your like reviews and social proof. He said that you should definitely always attach it to the email, but if you want, you can also paste it below your email within the text, just in case someone can't open an attachment that you send. In terms of follow-up, he said to follow up after a week or two, not right away, but don't be afraid to follow up relatively quickly. I know when we're talking about like querying agents and publishers that you would wait quite a while usually before following up, but with journalists, after a week or two, it probably means that it's gotten lost in their inbox. Also, be sure to follow up sooner and let them know if someone else is picking up the story, because it might make them more likely to pick it up. Whew, so that was a lot. So that was Saturday. After we were done, I met up with my husband at Greek restaurant for a little bit of a date night, which was wonderful, and then came back home. On Sunday, I got a slightly earlier start, had my first session before lunch, which was about how to use public speaking to build your author platform. I thought that this session, which was by Alice May, was much more practical than any of the sessions that I had been to the day before, even more so than the going to press session. And there were a lot of really good tips in here. I will say that in a couple of these talks, it did seem very geared towards indie authors, which is totally fine. And I think that indie authors, there's a lot more of the onus on them as individuals to market their book and publicize their book. And you have to do all of that work yourself if you're going to self-publish. But it did mean that for me, I had to kind of put everything through a filter of like, I don't necessarily need, nor should I be doing all of this. Like, the publisher is taking some of the money of my book for doing exactly this. Not that they always do, but I think that that especially reflects when we're talking about like the volume of sales and stuff like that. So again, this had a very big focus on like local events. For example, she kept talking about the WI, which I had to Google what that meant, and I think it means like the Women's Institute is what I found, but it's basically just like clubs of women in different towns. And it is like a very organized speaking circuit. They basically have different speakers about different topics every single week. You have to audition to be on their speakers list and stuff like that, but they are very well connected. The insight was good, which is like, again, don't be afraid to start local and it'll work you up to getting asked to do bigger and bigger things, being able to charge more and more for your speaking engagements. So she gave a lot of insight about that. A lot of it was very specific to Dorset and Hampshire. So I'm not gonna get into the weeds there. If you are local and you're interested in those insights, then let me know in the comments and I can share them there. But some of the more universal insights that she talked about were, first of all, don't use a PowerPoint unless you have to. You should be able to do your talk without slides. If you do have slides, make sure that they have minimal text. They should be there to serve as prompts and enhancements. But the second that people feel like they've read everything that you're going to say, they stop listening. So don't put a ton of text on your PowerPoints. She talked about using universal themes to choose the topic of your talk. Universal themes means things that will apply to people regardless of race, gender, age, ethnicity, spirituality, background, upbringing, education, all of that. So some universal themes would be things like change, power, romantic love, friendship, family, money, knowledge, technology. It's not that you would be giving a talk about like the whole of one of those, but it's about using those as a way to make sure that the things that you're going to talk about, yes, that relate to your book, are things that are going to be a touch point for everyone in your audience. You don't want to alienate anyone. You don't want anyone to be sitting there thinking, oh, this isn't for me. Like, everyone should be able to relate to the things that you're saying. You're also not giving a talk about your book. You're giving a talk about something that relates to the themes of your book and that relate to the process maybe of creating your book. She did also give a couple of tips for like improving anxiety around public speaking. Now, I'm quite comfortable with public speaking. I get that from my parents. That's a joke if you know my parents. They both hate public speaking, but they're both very good at it. I love it. I thrive. But one of the tips that sounded most helpful, that I don't think I've ever had to use, but it might be useful for you, is that actually a lot of the physical symptoms and the parts of your brain that process those symptoms that have to do with anxiety, so things like shallow breathing and sweating and heart palpitations and not being able to get your words out and things like that, those are also symptoms of excitement. And so over time, probably not the first time you speak publicly, but if it's something that you want to do more, over time you can kind of rewire your brain into perceiving that as excitement rather than as anxiety. And she also said it can be really helpful to think of like the one person in the room who really needs to hear what you have to say. And especially when you're focusing on like themes rather than your book, there will always be someone in the audience that just like really needs to hear what you have to say about that topic. So just picture them, picture how important it is that you communicate it to them and that you make them feel less alone. And that will help you feel more excited and more passionate about the speaking that you're about to do. Then I went to lunch with my friend Katie, which was lovely. This is the same Katie that did the monthly blind date with a book swap with me. And we basically spent the whole time talking about books. But then after that, I went to a session on ghostwriting, which was given by Adele Jordan, who is a ghostwriter. Now, this session, it wasn't as practical, but I still found it super helpful because it wasn't meant to be like best practices for ghostwriting. It was meant to be about like piquing people's interests in ghostwriting and sort of explaining how the ghostwriting industry works. And I found that really helpful because that's sort of the stage that I'm at, and I think the stage that most of the attendees were at when thinking about ghostwriting. Now, I'm not going to start ghostwriting anytime soon. I need to start getting more of my own books out in the world. However, maybe a few years down the line, I might start to look at what it could be like to write full time. And if I'm going to do that, ghostwriting is a really interesting way to try to supplement income. I'm quite a fast writer, so if I had more time to dedicate to it, then I think I could very reasonably work on my own books and on some ghostwriting projects. Some of the pros of ghostwriting, as she articulated them, are one, that it gives you just more experience with writing. The more you write, the better you get, and so especially if you're wanting to write your own stuff as well, it allows you to just sort of get through that practice a little bit quicker and not always on your own stuff. Second of all, it allows you to experience like other genres and other points of view that can help influence the things that you're writing and just make you feel more comfortable and more versatile as an author. And also it allows you to test out some of your ideas. It sounds like the briefs that she's getting are very, very short. They're like a sentence. One of the examples that she gave was like a Highland romance involving the betrayal of brothers set during the clan wars. Something like that. That's literally all she was given. And then it's her job to go away, come up with the rest of the story idea, submit that, they approve it, and then she writes it. So you get to kind of test out some of your ideas and test the market a little bit, because when there's a ghostwriter involved, it's because the publisher really believes that there's a market for that. I was shocked to learn like how much stuff is ghostwritten. Like, you would think the obvious ones are like celebrity memoirs, celebrity authored children's fiction is another big one, but actually it sounds like a lot of just general adult fiction is ghostwritten as well. She also mentioned, and I didn't know this before, that some publishers, especially the big ones, will have like fake authors where everything is ghostwritten. And the reason that they publish it under a fake author name rather than just publishing under the ghostwriter's name is because ghostwriters tend to get paid, unless they're doing some like big celebrity deal where it's gonna sell millions and millions of books. Most of the time they get paid a lump sum for their work rather than royalties. And so if the ghostwriter writes a book that they publish under a fake name, the publisher gets to keep all of those royalties. Some of the cons that she mentioned of ghostwriting are, first of all, you got a lack of control. Like, it's definitely less respectful of your creativity than I think a normal author-editor relationship would be, especially if you're working with like a celebrity memoir, for example, or celebrity authored fiction, because you'll just get a ton of notes back from the celebrity's team. It also does mean that you have to hand over some of your good ideas. And finally, it does sound like the pay isn't amazing as a ghostwriter for like the amount of work that you're doing, but I guess that also depends on how fast you write. Adele Jordan was basically saying she writes about 10,000 words a day, which is a lot. And she's not writing every single day. A lot of her days are planning days, but she does all of her planning ahead of time. So every day when she sits down, she knows exactly what she's writing, and that's how she's able to churn out so much. For me, I think that would be the biggest con. There is no opportunity to pants it as a ghostwriter. And as you know, if you've been around on the channel for a while, I really struggle with like the whole plotting versus pantsing thing, because in the past I have overplotted my books and it's made it really hard to feel creatively invested after I've already figured out how it's going to end, which makes them harder to write. But with ghostwriting, because you have to be super detailed in the synopsis that you submit before you can even start writing, there's no chance to do that. Every single beat is planned out to a T. And like, yes, you can make some changes as you go, but you have to be really communicative about that. You can't just like see how it goes. And the deadlines are such that you kind of have to do it that way. And then the last session that I went to was on marketing your book. And this was by Linda Liebrand, and this is another one that I think was really well tailored to indie authors, especially because she did talk a lot about like your title and your cover and your tagline on Amazon and the categories that you choose and stuff like that, which I obviously get to input on those things. But what I thought was super useful was this like book marketing machine graphic that she put up, which I will put on the screen now. But basically the idea is that all of your social media and your public speaking and stuff like that, any ads that you run, those are just the starting point. There should be this like engine of engagement behind that to try to turn all of those things into sales. And you're kind of using an email list for that. Now, I come from a marketing background, so this type of funnel is something that I've implemented a lot for businesses. It's not something that I've ever really thought of implementing for myself as an author. I do have an email list, and I do really enjoy putting together the emails for that. So if you're not already subscribed to my email list, I'll leave the link in the description. I send out a monthly newsletter where I share all my writing progress. I share reviews of books that I've read the previous month. I share my most popular video from the previous month and any resources for writers that I think are really helpful. And I'm looking at creating now, based on Linda's advice, some more kind of behind the scenes and exclusive stuff for that newsletter to try to make it a little bit more enticing, because then that newsletter is how people become engaged. And then when you have a launch coming up, you can be emailing that newsletter list to try to get those pre-orders, to try to get those early reviews. And then those are what help people on platforms like Amazon and Goodreads find your book to begin with, people who are outside your audience. And that is all of the sessions that I went to. I was absolutely wiped by the end of it, so I just came home, put on an audiobook, and played The Sims. If you know, you know. I'm actually going through a phase right now where I'm like building all of my book characters' houses in The Sims. So yes, there is a Sims version of The Summer House in Santorini. Let me know in the comments if you think that I should share that. Thank you so much to the organizers of the Bournemouth Writing Festival. Honestly, the atmosphere was so nice and everyone was so friendly, and I did learn so much, and I'm super excited for next year's. I hope there's a next year's. I will do what I can to make sure there's a next year's because I loved it so much. And thank you to you for watching. I hope that you learned something as well from my experience there. If you haven't already, be sure to hit subscribe, and like I said, sign up to my newsletter at the link in the description, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.